The Verk called her Subject 47. She had a name, of course. Everyone on Research Station or Volleys knew it. They had pulled it from the identification chip embedded in her wrist, cross-referenced it against the human registry databases they had purchased from a Quorum black market broker for approximately 900 standard credits. 900 credits for the complete identity of a living person. The Verk had considered it a reasonable price. Her name was Mara Calloway. She was 11 years old. She had brown hair that needed cutting, a gap between her two front teeth, and a habit of pressing her thumbnail against her lower lip when she was thinking hard about something. She'd been on a school transit shuttle from Kepler Station to the agricultural colony on Kepler 452b, a routine hop, the kind thousands of children made every year in the outer systems. The transit log would show a micronavigation error, a debris field, a tragic loss. The Verk were meticulous that way. Senior researcher Davek Vel reviewed the intake documentation with the same detached efficiency he brought to all his work. The human female was in excellent physical condition, within normal parameters for her age cohort, which was precisely what the neural plasticity division required. The experiment was straightforward in concept. They needed to map the response of a developing human nervous system to sustained low-frequency resonance fields. Humans were known throughout the galactic community for their unusual neural architecture, their capacity for recursive thought, their emotional processing loops that seemed, to most species, like a profound design flaw. To the Verk, those same loops represented an extraordinary research opportunity. No other species in known space had agreed to permit the experiment. Even the Quorum, who had no particular love for humans, had declined. Something about the optics. The Verk had solved the optics problem by removing the only witness. Davek Vel initialed the intake form and filed it in the station's secure research archive. He noted, because he was thorough, that the subject was currently uncooperative. She had been crying since intake. She had asked 17 times for her mother. She had, on 2 separate occasions, attempted to bite the containment handlers, which the staff had found baffling. Humans were small. The biting reflex struck the research team as a curious but irrelevant behavioral artifact. They sedated her for the calibration session and noted her sleep cycles in the log. Nobody asked her name. On the 3rd day, the sedation was reduced to allow baseline neural mapping. Mara Calloway woke up in a white room. She was strapped to a reclined chair, not uncomfortably. The Verk were not cruel in the obvious sense, with a ring of cold metal sensors pressed against her scalp. The room smelled wrong. Everything smelled wrong. The air had a flat, processed quality, like breathing from a sealed container, and the lights were too even, casting no shadows anywhere, which made her feel like she was inside a picture rather than a place. She didn't scream. She had already done her screaming. She had screamed until her throat was raw on the 1st day, screamed at the tall, pale gray beings who moved around her with clipboards and equipment and spoke to each other in a clicking language that the translator chip in her ear could only partially decode. Measurement, baseline, acceptable variance. Note the response pattern. On the 3rd day, Mara did something that would later be flagged in Davek Vel's research notes as anomalous subject behavior, origin unclear. She started counting. It was something her father had taught her. When things get scary, you count. Not because counting fixes anything, he'd been honest about that, but because your brain can't panic and count at the same time. Not really, not if you count carefully. So she counted the sensor nodes on the ring around her head, 12. She counted the ceiling tiles, 48. She counted the number of times the tall gray researcher on her left clicked before the one on the right responded, usually 3, sometimes 4. She was frightened. She was so frightened it was like swallowing a stone, but she was also under the fear * watching. The subject's cortisol response is stabilizing, said the translator in her ear. Flat voice. No emotion in the machine rendering of it. Noted, said Davek Vel. Mark the time, Mara filed that away too. Cortisol asterisk, she knew that word. It meant stress hormones. They were measuring her stress. "What are you doing to me?" she said. The two researchers looked at her, then at each other. Then Davek Vel made a small notation on his board and returned to his readouts. The other one, younger, she thought, though it was hard to tell with them, tilted its head at a precise angle and said something in the clicking language. The translator gave her, "Subject is vocalizing. Behavioral archive." "I said, what are you doing to me?" Mara said again. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "I know you can hear me. Your translator works. I can hear yours." A pause. Davek Vel did not look up. "The experiment is non-invasive. You will not be harmed." "You already harmed me. You took me from my shuttle." "The transit accident was." "There was no accident," Mara said. "I know there was no accident. Something grabbed us. I felt the artificial gravity before the lights went out." This time both researchers looked at her. The younger one made a mark on its own board and the translator gave her cognitive reconstruction speed, remarkable for age cohort. Note. Davek Vel looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, with what might have been the Verk equivalent of professional courtesy, "You are correct. There was no accident. You are here for a research purpose. The process will take approximately 30 standard days. You will be returned to human space when the study is complete." "Returned where? To who?" "That is a logistical matter. It will be arranged." Mara pressed her thumbnail against her lower lip and thought about that for a long time. "My mom is going to look for me," she said finally. Davek Vel made another notation. Human search and rescue operations in the outer systems have an average response radius of. "Not search and rescue," Mara said. "My mom." She didn't explain further. She didn't have words for it yet, that particular certainty. It was the kind of thing you either understood or you didn't. Davek Vel did not understand it. He filed the interaction under asterisk subject communication, non-research relevant, and returned to his calibration data. Part 2, the signal. The distress beacon was 11 days old when Chief Navigation Officer Priya Calloway found it. She hadn't been sleeping. She hadn't been doing much of anything that could be called asterisk functioning in the 14 days since the Kepler Transit Authority had told her that the shuttle carrying her daughter had been lost to a debris field. She had nodded when they told her. She had signed the acknowledgement forms. She had gone home to the small apartment on Kepler Station and sat on the floor of Mara's room for a long time, surrounded by the particular smell of a child's space, crayon dust and laundry, and the faintly sweet scent of the shampoo Mara used, and she had been very quiet. Then she had gone back to work. Her colleagues on the UECS Harrogate thought it was grief taking a strange shape. Her commanding officer, Captain Delano Reyes, had offered bereavement leave twice and been declined both times. Priya had thanked him and returned to her station and begun, with methodical precision, to pull navigation data. Not the transit authority's data, her own. The Harrogate was a survey vessel, one of the better-equipped ships in the outer system fleet, and Priya Calloway had 14 years of navigation experience and a specific, stubborn quality that her daughter had inherited. She did not accept explanations that didn't add up. The debris field in the official report was real, but the debris was wrong. She had run the spectral analysis 3 times. The composition matched processed alloy manufactured material, not the random mineral scatter of a natural field. Someone had seeded it, left it there like a prop. She brought the analysis to Captain Reyes on the 11th day. He read it twice. He was quiet for a while. He was a careful man, Reyes, methodical, fair, not given to dramatics, and the look on his face when he set the tablet down was one she would remember for the rest of her life. Not pity, something older and harder than pity. "Nav Officer Calloway," he said carefully, "if you're right about this." "I'm right." "If you're right," he continued, Then what happened to your daughter was not an accident. It was a deliberate act of abduction against a human minor by an unknown non-human party operating in human transit space. He paused. Do you understand what that means, under the Kepler Accords? It's an act of war, Priya said. It is an act of war, he agreed. And the response? Captain, her voice was very steady. I don't want to discuss the legal framework. I want to find my daughter. I need you to authorize a long-range signal trace on a very specific electromagnetic frequency. She slid a second tablet across his desk. This frequency. It matches the drive signature of a class of research vessels flagged to the Ver Compact. Reyes looked at the data for a long time. How long have you been building this? He asked. 11 days. He looked at her, really looked at her, the way people rarely do, and then he picked up his command override card and authorized the trace. Get me a location, he said, and then I'm making some calls. The location came back in 6 hours. Research Station Orvalis, operating under Verk's scientific charter in a system technically outside the treaty boundaries of the Human Accord, a gap the Verk had clearly identified and deliberately exploited. Reyes made his calls. The first was to Fleet Admiral Jana Osai, commanding officer of the 3rd Outer Systems Defense Wing. The second was to the Terran Diplomatic Corps. The third, which surprised his crew when they found out about it later, was to 7 other captains he knew personally, men and women who had children of their own, who had served in the outer systems long enough to understand what happened when you let the first transgression slide. I need you to understand what I'm asking, he told Admiral Osai. This isn't a retrieval operation dressed up as a show of force. We're talking about a full accountability action. I understand what you're asking, the Admiral said. She had a voice like deep water, calm on the surface, cold all the way down. The question is whether you understand what you're asking. They took a child, Reyes said, an 11-year-old girl from a school transport. Silence on the line. How many ships do you need? The Admiral said. Part 3, 30 days. On the station, the experiment continued. Mara had stopped expecting rescue on day 5. Not because she'd given up, she had specifically decided not to give up, and she was stubborn enough that deciding something was nearly the same as it being true, but because waiting for rescue was passive, and being passive made the fear worse. So she stopped waiting and started working. The younger researcher was named something unpronounceable, but the translator rendered it as something close to *Oric*. Oric was assigned to overnight monitoring, which the Verk seemed to consider a lesser duty, a posting for the less senior staff. This meant Oric was young, and young, Mara had noticed, sometimes meant *curious*. You're watching me, she said on the 4th overnight session, when the station was as quiet as a place like this got. Oric didn't answer, but it also didn't look away. Not with the equipment, Mara clarified. You're watching me like you're trying to figure something out. A long pause. Then the translator clicked and gave her, your behavioral responses do not match our projected models. What did you expect? Sustained distress, Oric said. Incapacitation. Humans in novel high-stress environments typically exhibit extended panic responses. I was scared, Mara said honestly. I'm still scared. Being scared doesn't mean you stop working. Oric tilted its head at that precise angle again. Working at what? Mara looked at it. Finding a way home. There is no way. Not yet, she said. But I'm paying attention. I know how many staff cycles there are. I know where the external comms relay is. You keep glancing at it when you log your nightly reports. I know the main door lock cycles on a 14-second delay when the atmospheric scrubbers run. I know you have 3 researchers instead of 5 this week because 2 are on the station at the far end of the corridor. I heard the door sequence change 4 days ago. She paused. I'm working. I just don't have all the pieces yet. Oric was very still for a very long time. "You are 11 years old," it said finally. "Yes. Your neural development index is in the 78th percentile for your cohort." "Is that good?" "It is." "Hi," Oric said, with a quality the translator rendered as something close to uncertainty. "We had projected your species cognitive." It stopped, started again. "Our models may require revision." "Okay," Mara said. "Can I ask you something?" "You may ask." "Do you have kids?" The translator hummed. Then, "Werk, do not use that terminology. We have." The click language equivalent was something the translator rendered as asterisk continuation investment. "Young. Yes." "How old?" "In your terms, approximately 9 years." Mara looked at it steadily. "What would you do," she said, "if someone took them?" Oric didn't answer for a very long time. It sat very still in the way that Mara had come to learn meant intense processing rather than absence. The Werk equivalent of staring at the ceiling, she thought. "I would." It stopped. The translator struggled. "I would find them." "My mom is going to find me," Mara said. She said it the same way she'd said it to Davak Vel on the third day, flat, simple, as certain as gravity. "And you should think about what that's going to mean for this station. Because humans we don't do things by halves. When we come for someone we love, we come." She lay back in the chair and closed her eyes. "I'm going to sleep now," she said. "Can you turn the light down a little, the overhead ones, not the monitoring strips?" After a pause, the overhead lights dimmed. Mara lay in the half-dark and breathed carefully and thought about her mother's hands, the specific weight of them on her shoulders. And she did not let herself cry, because she had decided not to, and that decision held. On day 17, Oric began leaving small things near her chair. The first was a cup of something hot that turned out to taste approximately like weak tea Werk nutrient solution with a warming compound, she guessed, but the gesture was clear. The second was a flexible data pad loaded with what appeared to be basic Werk language primers. The third was harder to categorize. A small object polished smooth, about the size of a river stone, that the translator gave no context for. She held it in her palm and looked at Oric. "For the fear," Oric said. The translator rendered the word it used as something between asterisk anchor and comfort object. A concept the Werk apparently had, tucked away somewhere in their culture, even if they didn't let it into their research protocols. Mara closed her fingers around it. "Thank you," she said. She kept studying, she kept counting, she kept working. On day 22, she found the flaw in the atmospheric scrubber cycle she'd been waiting for. A 4-second window when the corridor pressure equalized and the secondary door seals briefly disengaged. Not enough time to get far. Not enough time to do much of anything, really. But enough time if she'd had something to send. She didn't, but she filed it away. On day 26, in the middle of what Davak Vel's logs called asterisk session 14, extended resonance mapping asterisk, Mara felt the station shudder. It was subtle, the kind of thing you'd miss if you weren't paying attention. Mara was paying attention. She looked at Oric, who was at its monitoring station across the room. Oric's head came up sharply. The two researchers exchanged something in the click language that the translator gave her as external contact, proximity alert, classification. The classification word didn't translate. But Oric's posture did. She'd spent 26 days learning the language of Werk bodies, and what she saw in Oric's stillness right now was not the careful scientific detachment she'd watched all month. It was fear. Mara pressed her thumbnail against her lower lip and smiled for the first time in 26 days. Part 4, The Fleet. The asterisk Ukes Harrogate dropped out of FTL at the system boundary at 400 station time, and it did not come alone. Admiral Osa had sent 14 ships. This was not, by any technical measure, a war fleet, not the kind that showed up in history books, the massive formation deployments with fighter screens and orbital bombardment arrays. What arrived at the edge of the Orvali system was something more precise than that. 7 deep space survey vessels refitted with military-grade shielding, 3 dedicated search and rescue frigates, 2 diplomatic escort ships, a long-range communications relay tender, and the UECS Meridian Dawn Asterisk, which was an Accord enforcer vessel, and whose presence in any system was, by treaty, a statement of intent that required no further elaboration. Captain Reyes stood on the bridge of the Harrogate and watched the formation hold its position and felt something he didn't have a clean word for. It wasn't satisfaction, wasn't anger, wasn't grief. It was something colder and more focused than any of those things. Priya Calloway was at her navigation station. She had not slept in 31 hours. She had the location of Research Station Orvali's on her screen, and she was looking at it with the specific quality of stillness that Reyes had come to recognize over the past 2 weeks. The stillness of a person who has gone somewhere beyond fear, into the clear country past it where things are very simple. The comms officer said, "Captain, we're receiving a hail from Station Orvali's." "Put it through." The voice that came through the translation matrix was stiff with what sounded like carefully controlled alarm. Unidentified vessel formation. You are in the vicinity of Verk Scientific Installation Orvali's, operating under valid research charter filed with the Interstellar Science Compact. Please identify your purpose. Reyes said, "This is Captain Delano Reyes of the UECS Harrogate, operating under authorization of Fleet Admiral Jana Osai, 3rd Outer Systems Defense Wing, United Earth Colonial Systems. We are here for the retrieval of one Mara Calloway, human national, age 11, abducted from a Kepler system transit route on or about day 14 of this standard month. You will release the child immediately and stand by for boarding." A pause, a long one. There is no human individual aboard this station." "Station Orvali's," said a second voice on the channel deeper, with the flat cadence of someone reading from a prepared statement. Reyes recognized it. Admiral Osai, broadcasting from the Asterisk Meridian Dawn Asterisk. "This is Fleet Admiral Jana Osai. I want to be very precise with you about your current situation, so that there is no ambiguity. 14 vessels of the United Earth Colonial Systems are in your system. 3 of them are equipped with long-range forensic scanning arrays capable of biological signature identification. We have the biometric record of Mara Calloway. We will find her on your station whether you cooperate or not. What changes based on your cooperation is what happens next." A pause. "I suggest you consider that carefully." Another silence, longer. Then the station frequency clicked and a different voice came through, older, measured with the quality of someone recalculating in real time. "This is Senior Researcher Davak Vel. I am prepared to discuss the situation." Reyes looked at Priya. She had not moved. Her eyes were on the station's position marker, and her hands were very still on her console. "That's not a discussion," Reyes said into the comms. "That's a retrieval. Prepare for shuttle approach." They brought her out in the 3rd hour. The shuttle airlock cycled and Reyes watched the feed from the docking bay cameras, and he was not a man who cried easily, but the moment he saw her, small, gap-toothed, with a ring of faint marks on her scalp from the sensor equipment, and a smooth stone held tight in her right fist, something moved in his chest that he didn't examine too closely. Priya Calloway was in the docking bay. She had technically not been authorized to be in the docking bay. Reyes had looked at her face when she'd said she was going down there, and had very deliberately not said anything about authorization. The moment the airlock opened, Mara Calloway saw her mother across the bay and made a sound that wasn't a word, just a sound. The sound of 26 days of held together finally letting go, and ran. Priya dropped to her knees on the docking bay floor and caught her daughter and held on. The rescue team gave them a long moment, and then another one. Some of the crew found reasons to look at their equipment. Commander Faye Duskel, the boarding team lead, cleared her throat eventually and made the note in her log that the primary mission objective had been achieved at 8:47 station time. She wrote it very carefully, and then she set the tablet down and waited for her eyes to clear before she picked it up again. Part 5, The Reckoning. What came next was not technically a war. The Verk Compact's leadership had spent approximately 48 hours in emergency session before the diplomatic team arrived, and by all accounts, gathered later from the recorder logs that were part of the settlement archive. The internal debate had been fierce and brief, and ended with the complete collapse of the Scientific Research Directorate's position. Because once the recording from Mara Calloway's intake session was extracted from Station Orvali's archive and played in open channel for the 14-ship formation, there was nothing left to debate. Subject 47. 900 credits, transit accident, 30 standard days. The Verk diplomatic envoy who met with Admiral Osai 2 days later was a very old individual named Prestel Vo, and Osai's account of the meeting, which became one of the most read documents in the colonial system's diplomatic archive over the following decade, described Prestel Vo as someone who understood, precisely and without evasion, how badly the compact had miscalculated. "You did not think we would come," Osai had said. "Our models suggested the probability of a retrieval action of this scale was..." Prestel Vo had stopped. "Our models were incorrect." "Yes," Osai said, "they were." She had laid a single document on the table between them. "These are our terms." The terms were not gentle. The research charter for Station Orvali's was permanently revoked. The station itself was decommissioned within 90 days, and its research archives on human neural subjects, all of them, going back 12 years, because the Harrogatel's forensic team had found that Mara was not the first, only the first the Verk had been caught with, were surrendered to the Colonial Systems Science Oversight Board. Davek Vel and the lead research team were remanded to the Interstellar Science Compact's Accountability Tribunal. The Verk Compact paid reparations that amounted, in practical terms, to the complete restructuring of their outer systems scientific program. And they signed an addendum to the Kepler Accords that had no formal name, but that everyone in the diplomatic corps referred to, from that point on, as the Calloway Provision. It was 14 words long. No sentient minor of any species may be subjected to non-consensual scientific procedure under any charter. 14 words. They had taken Mara 26 days to get back. 14 words, and then the thing that had been done to her became, formally and permanently, a line that the rest of the galaxy knew better than to cross. Part 6. After. Mara Calloway went back to school 4 weeks after her return to Kepler Station. She had nightmares for a while. She had a very good therapist who specialized in trauma recovery, and who, in their 3rd session, had looked at the notes Mara had kept during her captivity, the counts, the cycle observations, the detailed behavioral notes on her captors, and said, with great care, "Mara, do you know what you did here?" "Paid attention," Mara said. "You built a survival framework," the therapist said. "At 11 years old, under sustained high-stress conditions, you built a methodology." Mara pressed her thumbnail against her lower lip. "My dad taught me to count," she said, "when things get scary." "It worked." "Mostly I was just scared," she said. "I just didn't stop doing stuff while I was scared." The therapist wrote something down. Mara didn't ask what. She kept the smooth stone Orc had given her. She kept it on her desk, next to her homework tablet and the small photo of her mother that she'd put there when she came home and hadn't taken down since. She didn't have a name for what it meant to her. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, because what the Verk had done to her wasn't something she was ready to file under that category, and maybe she never would be. But Orc had dimmed the lights when she asked. Oric had seen her and had begun, in small ways, to treat her like a person. That was worth something. She thought it was worth keeping. She went back to school and she was quiet in a different way than before, and she was still stubborn and gap-toothed, and she still had the habit of counting things when she was stressed, tiles, steps, the rhythm of her own breathing. Her friends noticed something had changed and didn't quite know how to ask about it. She didn't quite know how to explain it. She tried once to explain it to her mother. They were sitting on the floor of Mara's room, which was Priya's preferred location for important conversations ever since she'd spent the worst night of her life in it, and the light was the soft, yellow kind that made everything feel a little gentler. "I'm okay," Mara said. "I mean, I'm not all the way okay, but I'm okay enough." "That's enough," Priya said. "I kept thinking the whole time, I kept thinking about how you'd find me, like I just knew you would." She looked at her mother. "How did you find me?" Priya was quiet for a moment. "The debris was wrong," she said. "I looked at the data until I could see what was wrong about it." "That's so," Mara almost smiled. "That's such a navigation officer thing." "I'm a navigation officer." "I know." Mara leaned against her mother's shoulder. "I knew you'd look at the data. I knew you'd find the thing that was wrong. I kept thinking, she's going to find the thing that's wrong. She's going to keep working until she finds it." Priya put her arm around her daughter and felt the solid, real, irreplaceable weight of her and breathed. "You sound like me," she said. "I know," Mara said. "I know I do." Captain Reyes wrote in his personal log, the night after Mara came home. "There is a thing people say, usually people who haven't been in the outer systems long, people who haven't watched the human diaspora reach its fingers into the dark and build something there. They say that humanity's defining characteristic is our aggression, our violence, our expansion. I've heard it from 3 species at this point. The Quorum said it first. The Verk will probably not say it again. I think they're wrong. I think the thing that defines us, the thing that the Verk failed to model, the thing that their research protocols had no category for, is that we do not abandon our children. That is not aggression. It is something older than aggression. It is something that does not have a clean name in any language I know. 14 ships. 14 ships from 14 captains, most of whom had never met Mara Calloway, because Fleet Admiral Osai made 3 calls and asked for volunteers, and 14 ships showed up. "Our models were incorrect," Prestel Vaux said. "Yes, they were. They always will be." Orcs submitted a research paper 12 months after the events at Station Orvales. It was rejected by the first 4 journals it was submitted to, on the grounds that its conclusions were insufficiently supported by empirical data. The 5th journal, a small independent publication focused on interspecies behavioral studies, accepted it with minor revisions. The paper was titled, "On the Inadequacy of Predictive Threat Models in Human Response to Kinship Disruption, a Case Study." The abstract began, "Current models of human behavior under institutional stress consistently underweight the role of kinship bonding as a motivating force. This paper argues that human kinship response, particularly parental and familial, does not operate on a cost-benefit calculus and cannot be modeled as such. The assumption that humans will weigh personal risk against the statistical probability of successful retrieval is demonstrably false. A more accurate framing is, humans in kinship crisis states do not calculate, they act. Any model that fails to account for this will fail to predict outcomes." The paper was cited 847 times in the following 5 years. In the acknowledgments section, Oric had written, "I thank Subject 47, whose name is Mara Calloway, for teaching me the difference between an organism and a person." Mara read it eventually. Someone sent her the link when she was 17 with a short message, "Thought you'd want to see this." She read it twice. She sat with the smooth stone in her palm and thought about the half-dark of a room on a station far away, and the lights that had dimmed when she asked, and the long, cold weeks she had spent counting and watching and deciding not to stop working. She looked at the acknowledgement for a long time. Then she opened a new message and composed it carefully. Dear Oric, my name is Mara Calloway. You knew me by a different name. I've read your paper. I think your abstract is right. I think there's a follow-up paper in it somewhere about what happens when the thing being modeled is not just the response but the training. How humans learn to be that way. How we pass it down. I think you'd have to talk to a human to write it properly. I'm willing to talk if you are. She sent it. She set the stone back on her desk, next to the photo. Outside the window of her room on Kepler Station, the outer system stretched dark and vast, and full of things they were still learning to understand. She picked up her homework. She had work to do. And word count, *9, 800 words estimated duration, *minutes at 160 WPM.